Welcome back to the Chuck Campbell Show, and now I'm going to talk to a couple of representatives of a political party that you may not have heard of, but you really should know more about, and so tonight you're going to learn about them. It is the North Carolina Constitution Party. They are a state chapter of a national Constitution Party, and joining me is Terry Hardison, who is the Central Regional Director for the North Carolina Constitution Party, and Kevin Hayes, who is the Wayne County Director for the Constitution Party here in North Carolina. So, Kevin.
Thank you.
Terry.
Thank you,
welcome.
sir.
So glad that you could be here with me this evening.
About that.
And so, for folks who may have never heard of the Constitution Party, one of the things that I really admire about the party is that they're very much grounded, not just in the Constitution, but in the biblical foundations of the Constitution. So, Terry, can you tell us a little about that?
One reason that I united with the Constitution Party was their stand on moral issues, biblical principles, and we pride ourselves on being more concerned with principles in politics. In fact, we tell individuals or tell folks that it's principles above politics, where your parties, your two major parties, and we see that that's very evident nationwide, that that sometimes the moral issues, the biblical issues, the values that America, I believe, hold dear, sometimes are ignored. I think your guest just a few moments ago, I think you alluded to this, that the Republican Party in some areas want to lay aside the social issues. Well, I don't think it's possible to have the kind of party that I believe the American people really want to have if you lay aside these important social issues, these values that I believe that grassroots America wants to see come back to our nation and our parties.
Well, our founding fathers were very clear. They gave us a republic, but that form of government with its freedoms and responsibilities was only really going to be suitable to a religious and moral people, a Christian people.
I believe you're right there, Chuck. I know myself, I'm a pastor, preacher, and again, I've been a Republican. I was a Republican for several years and voted Republican, but I began to do a lot of research concerning the abortion issue. In fact, I've been involved in the pro-life arena for quite some time, and I began to hear this thing of, well, I'm pro-life with the exception of this or that. And I began to think there are no exceptions. Life is important. All life is important. And I believe if you begin taking life on one end with abortion, you're going to begin taking life on the other end, euthanasia. And of course, I see all that coming about if somebody doesn't stand up and say something. And I believe this nation's in need of a solid, principled third party.
Well, now, in my opinion, I think I read it on a World magazine blog, but I can't remember the fellow who wrote it. But in essence, what he said, Kevin, was to ignore the patient in the moral coma, i.e. America, while you're trying to figure out how to pay the hospital bills, you know, i.e. the government spending, is short-sighted and self-destructive. Do you think that our country just needs to forget about the social issues, the moral issues, and just talk about money, Kevin?
Absolutely not. Our guest before had it right. If you can't protect life, you can't protect liberty. There's a reason we talk about protecting life and liberty. Life is first, you know. And the moral issues, the way our moral principles go, is our country goes down a moral path that's wrong, so will our country. And I believe that a lot of the problems economically is because we've deteriorated morally in this country.
Well, now, I agree with you on that. Obviously, one reason that a lot of viewers may not be familiar, or more viewers may not be familiar with the North Carolina Constitution Party, is because you're not on the ballot, and there's a struggle. And I have to say that I support you in this struggle for fairness and equal access to the ballot. Would one of you gentlemen care to explain to the viewing audience what's going on?
I'm going to let Kevin do this because he is with an organization that's fighting for this.
I'm also on the board of Free to Vote, which is fighting the reduce the ballot access requirement in North Carolina through the Electoral Freedom Act, which is House Bill 32 and Senate Bill 225. Basically, North Carolina requires the second most signatures behind the state of California. We require 85,000.
They're a little bit bigger than us out there in California, too,
That's
aren't they?
correct.
Yeah.
Also, they have another means of getting on the ballot. They allow people to register voters, and you get a certain number of extra voters, you can get on the ballot. North Carolina, the only way you can get on the ballot, new party, is you have to petition.
Yeah. Now, you were mentioning before we came on the air earlier, a lot of states think they need 10,000 signatures to get on the ballot. North Carolina, 85,000?
Yeah. Well, the stats say 76% of the states require 20,000 signatures or less, and 68% require 10,000 signatures or less. So
but in North Carolina, how many signatures does the party need to get on the ballot?
85,379, which is 2% of the vote for the last election in governor.
Now, that's not just 85,000 signatures collected, because those signatures has to be verified.
Yes,
so don't you have to have like an overage of 15 or 20%? I mean, you got to get over 100,000 signatures to net 85,000, right?
We estimate we need between 110 to 115,000 signatures.
And isn't there, besides, you talked about the bill that's in the General Assembly, I'm not familiar with that bill, but isn't there a lawsuit going on? I think the Libertarian Party has put forward?
Yes, but they lost a lawsuit. It was ruled on probably about a month and a half, 2 months ago. So now the only means of changing this law is through the General Assembly, which we have bipartisan support, both Democrats and Republicans. In the House, Representative LaRoque and Representative Glenn Bradley are the Republicans' primary sponsors, and Representative Gene Farmer Butterfield and Representative Paul Lupi are the Democrat primary sponsors.
Now, I'm glad to hear you have bipartisan support for this, because to me it just comes down to a matter of fairness and the American way, okay? If there are 10 or 20,000 people in this state, I think that's an adequate number, in my humble opinion, for a party to be able to put their candidates on the ballot and compete in the process for people's votes. I think it's excessive to have to collect over 100,000 signatures to net just 85,000 signatures in order to get on the ballot. And you have time constraints in which you got to do that in, right?
Well, yes, sir. You basically can start the, for a new party, you can start the day after the general election and start from that. So you basically would have basically 3.5 years to get that.
Okay.
But there's also, once you get on the ballot, you have a retention requirement. You have to poll 2% for governor or president. And if you don't, you'd start all over again.
Well, it just seems that to me that it would be fair and for third parties to be able to get on the ballot. I think even fourth parties to be able to get on the ballot. But let's talk about other things that the Constitution Party stands for. Okay, we talked about the sanctity of life. I've read your platform. What are some of the other key points of the platform for the Constitution Party?
Well, one major thing, Chuck, is, and I know a lot of folks are concerned about the right to bear arms, and of course we're a party that believes that we have that right, according to the Constitution, to bear arms, and it's evident that the Democrat Party and maybe even some of the Republicans, and of course Obama would like to take our weapons away from us, and so we believe in the right to bear arms. Also, religious freedom.
Well, let's go back to that right to bear arms thing, the Second Amendment, because, I mean, wasn't Jesus a pacifist? You know, Terry, I mean, should Christians really be using guns?
Well, I believe we have a right to protect ourselves from those who might harm us. In fact, our nation, one responsibility of our country has is to protect us from those who would make us victims or those who would do harm to us. We have that right. Jesus was not a pacifist. Jesus was one that got upset with folks abusing his, when he threw over the tables and, you know, and what have you. And Jesus himself would, I believe, I may be going out on a limb today, but he would give us the right to protect ourselves from our enemies. And in fact, Romans 13 and what have you.
Let me read a scripture for you here, Pastor Terry. Might help you out here a little bit. We often hear this argument thrown up at us that Jesus said, "Turn the other cheek." Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, some of these idioms or colloquialisms from the first century dialect are lost on us. If you do a study, you'll find out that turn the other cheek was an expression that meant you were being insulted. So when you're insulted or offended, he didn't mean literally when you're punched in the face. Now let's see what Jesus did when he was literally slapped in the face. This is from the Bible, John chapter 18, and starting at verse 22 here. Speaking of Jesus, when he had said these things, one of the temple police standing by slapped Jesus, saying, "Is that a way for you to answer the high priest?" Question. How many of you out there know if Jesus turned the other cheek when he was literally slapped? Did Jesus literally turn the other cheek when he was literally slapped? He did not. As a matter of fact, he questioned. He said, quote, "If I have spoken wrongly," Jesus answered him, "give evidence about the wrong, but if rightly, why do you hit me?" He challenged the authority and actually rebuked the person who struck him. He surely did not turn the other cheek.
Chuck, we have the attitude, as in many places, and I'm going to include the church in on this, we have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as Mr. Johnson said a few moments ago. And it seems to me that many in our country have been rocked to sleep to believe that we are to be a pacifist. We're not to be. The Bible tells us also that we're to do battle right at the gates of hell. That is, defend ourselves. Jesus, and I don't want to start preaching, but Jesus said, "I'm going to build my church." And we're not to be pacifists. We're to be aggressive. We're to be, and some folks don't like this, militant. Militant just simply means being aggressive. Defend our liberties, our freedoms. If we don't, they will be taken from us. And one way to do that is to take our guns.
You know, Kevin, what Terry here is saying, for me, I boil it down to what I call the stewardship of our citizenship. You know, we are born Americans by the grace of God, and we have rights and liberties and duties as well. And I think we have a stewardship of our citizenship to defend and protect those rights. What do you think?
I totally agree, and I believe George Washington said guns are the teeth of liberty. And so I totally agree with your assessment of that. We absolutely have a right to defend our liberty. I believe it's a God-given right that we had that right.
Now, in Plano, Texas, about 8 years ago, there was a little girl who brought, maybe a little boy, he brought some candy canes into his classroom Christmas time. And he had a little note that explains the story of the candy cane. For those of you who don't know, that cane is a J. It stands for Jesus, and that's where the candy cane originated from. The school shut the kid down, wouldn't allow him to distribute it, said that they have authority over any religious speech or activity, and they can shut it down. There's a case that's now going up before the U.S. Supreme Court. Ken Starr and another fellow, I'll take a look at that in a minute and get his name again. He's the fellow defending the marriage amendment. They're taking this to court. Our religious liberties are under attack in this country so badly that our children can't even give out candy canes at school that explain that the candy cane represents Jesus.
Well, I believe...
Should we take that sitting down?
No, sir. I've got my own opinion about the government schools. I think they have completely failed. I think we are harming our young people today, those who attend these schools. We spend more time with social engineering them and preparing them to be really rebels in our society, where they don't have to obey parents, and you have these children have their rights. They're being taught these things. In other words, more than teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, you're social engineering these young folks, and that's what's happening in the government schools. They have an agenda, and the Teachers Association, they have an agenda, and it's working. And it's completely closed the mouths of many of those who would like to speak up for the Lord Jesus in our schools and what have you. And this is results of some of the things coming out of our government schools.
And if I might add, the U.S. Department of Education, which is unconstitutional, we're totally in favor of abolishing it, which is what Republicans promised in 1994 when they went in with Newt Gingrich and the thing. And not only did they not abolish the U.S. Department of Education, they increased funding to increase the size and scope of the U.S. Department of Education. We believe we must get education back to the local levels where parents can have more control over education and be back where it belongs, in the hands of the local
level. You know, the only way that can happen, though, all this federal funding that's coming down for education, that's how they have their hand in a control of our school system. How can we get the funding if we don't have the federal bureaucracy?
I think it's a state thing. I think states should prepare better for that. And you're right, once we begin to take federal aid, I know some colleges that started off correctly biblically, and they began to have dollar signs in their eyes and began to get support from government, which took away all the freedom and liberties of that Bible college. And today, I could name several schools that started off with a ball of fire for the Lord Jesus, and now because government stepped in, it's robbed them. I believe it should be a state responsibility and not federal. And I think parents need to step up to the bat and be what we have a family breakdown in this nation and in states. We bring children in our church oftentimes that many of them don't know who mom and dad are. Parents need to step up. The states need to step up and be responsible.
Well, let me get back to that Citizen Link article, and it was December 2003, 8-year-old Jonathan Morgan, okay? And the gentlemen who are going to argue this case before the U.S. Supreme Court are two former U.S. Solicitor Generals, Paul Clement, who actually is the one that the Republican Congress hired to defend the DOMA Act, Defense of Marriage Act, in the Supreme Court, and Ken Starr. So there you have it there. Looking at your literature on the 7 core essential values, we got about 8 minutes left, and I want to cover these. We talked about sanctity of life, religious freedom. You touched on the traditional family and the Second Amendment. How about this private property rights? One of our founding fathers said, and I believe that without religion and morality, there is no security for personal property or private property.
You're absolutely right, Kevin. You want to speak to this?
Yes, sir. We believe that you should have right to your personal property and should be secured in your personal property. One of the things that's attacking personal property, I believe, is the U.S. Patriot Act is taking away a lot of our liberties, where they can, it authorizes the government to come in and basically invade your private property if they want to. And another thing we're totally against is this forced annexation, which there is a bill in the currently, I think it will be signed into law pretty soon. Hopefully our governor will sign a law basically ending forced annexation in North Carolina. And we've worked closely with a lady, Catherine Heath, which is Stop NC Annexation, where basically cities can come in and annex your property and make you pay high property taxes, and basically you don't get nothing in return, basically.
You know, I think that there's a case to be made, Kevin, that private property rights are biblical and they're in the 10 Commandments, because when the commandment says thou shalt not steal, then the positive of thou shalt not steal is I have a right to my property because you don't have a right to steal it.
That's correct. I agree with you on that.
And it's sad that even, you know, I own my home and property, and even as a pastor and preacher, when I get my property tax bill, my blood begins to boil. I don't owe them this. This is my land, my property, and today we have very few rights, and now we're seeing these rights being taken from us, and the Constitution Party is willing to stand up and say we've had enough of this.
Now, in your literature, it says you're anti-socialism, and it talks about national health care. So where do you come down on this Obamacare and, you know, Mitt Romney when he was governor of Massachusetts, the Romney Care? What's your take on that?
We're totally opposed to the Obamacare. I mean, in fact, we got literature right here that tells you different things in section to Obamacare, like Section 2953 gives a gateway for opportunity for government control of abortions. I mean, you can go through a list and list of things that's simply unconstitutional. We don't believe that the government has a right to force people to buy health insurance.
So why do you think that people should join the Constitution Party and help you get on the ballot? Why should they do that? Why, you know, there are a lot of people out there that are, you've come up against this, I'm sure they're saying, look, we got a Republican Party, it's a Conservative Party, we got a Democrat Party, it's the Liberal Party, and even if I'm a moderate, I'm going to go one way or the other, but I don't want to throw my vote away. What do you say to that?
Well, I think it was John Quincy Adams that said, though you may vote alone, always vote for principle. And our candidates will abide by our 7 core values no matter what. And that's one reason we like to nominate our candidates by convention. But current state law says once we get on the ballot, we have to nominate by primary. But we'll endorse our candidates at a convention. But All we're asking is people to go to our website, constitutionpartync.com, download our petition, sign it. Just give us the right to be on the ballot. Until we get to that point, we can't even have our voice be heard.
I think that's fair and reasonable request there. We got about 5 minutes left, and we're going to wrap this up here. But Terry, how close are you right now to getting the 100,000 plus signatures that you need to get on the ballot?
We have a long way to go, and we're just hoping that something will happen within the system that will give us a lower number where we can get out maybe 10,000 names or signatures or what have you. This 85,000, as we've already mentioned, and over 100,000 necessary really to get on the ballot. We just need some action from some of our politicians to give the North Carolina people a free opportunity for free and be able to vote for who they please.
Now, Kevin, this bill that you said is in the legislature. How many? What's the minimum requirement to get on the ballot with this bill?
The original proposal was 10,000 signatures for a new party, and 5,000 for statewide.
And what is that bill again?
It's House Bill 32 and Senate Bill 225.
House Bill 32 and Senate 235?
Yes, and we'd appreciate if you would contact your representative and ask them to support the bill. We believe it will be in the Election Law Committee this coming Wednesday, but we're not certain yet.
All right, so what are you going to do if you don't get on the ballot? Are you gonna give up? You're gonna try again?
We will try again, but basically we would have to do what the Libertarian Party did. They hired petitioners. They paid well over $100,000 the last election to get on the ballot. But that's where we're standing at now. Of course, their number
$100,000 for people to go around.
Mm-hmm.
All you need to do is get acorns.
But their number was lowered then too, so it would be
might
more than
I add, Chuck, too, that by our very presence, it's also assisting in holding the Republican Party responsible too, their feet to the fire.
Right. So here's one of the things that you're up against. You're trying to get onto the ballot. If you don't get onto the ballot, do you sit out the presidential election? Do you tell your people to go out and vote for the best candidate anyway? What do you do?
Well, we probably have a write-in for president. We were on the ballot in approximately 40 states, 42 states last time, so we'll probably be on the ballot around the same number this time. And in North Carolina, it's so bad you have to petition just to be a write-in, 500 signatures just to be a write-in, which is we're the only state that requires a presidential candidate to petition to be a write-in.
Who's been writing these laws for the last 140 years in this state? Boy, oh boy, they sure boxed any competition out of the ballot. So have you got like a Koch brothers or George Soros or an Art Pope or somebody like that who's got deep pockets who's funding you to do all this?
If we do, I don't know where they are.
Right.
We'd like for somebody to step forward and help us, but that's yet to happen.
Now, what about national sovereignty? I got to say, the libertarians that I know, besides being moral anarchists, I mean, they're pretty good on economics, but they want to withdraw all of our U.S. armed forces from around the world, and they're isolationist. What's the position of the North Carolina Constitution Party on national sovereignty and defense?
Well, we believe that as much as possible stay out of the affairs of other nations. And we would sort of be with the libertarians on this.
We're not interventionists, not isolationists. There's a fine line there, but we basically believe that we need to basically bring our troops home, mind our own business, when only attack countries when we're pre-attacked.
Well, what about these people who are coming over here, hijacking planes and flying them into buildings and wanting to set off bombs and things?
We could. I believe if we had followed the advice of, say, Thomas Jefferson, with how he dealt with the barbarian pirates, where he sent basically mercenaries to take out the barbarian pirates, we could have basically done the same thing with Osama bin Laden and had him captured years ago, I believe, personally.
Too much political correctness going on.
Kevin, Terry, I'm sorry, we got less than a minute left here. Make an appeal to the viewers. Why should they help the North Carolina Constitution Party get on the ballot in 2012? I
would encourage you to, number one, pray for us. We believe we have a right to get on the ballot. And I believe not only is there a need for a third party, but maybe several parties to give people a real opportunity to vote for the man or woman of their choice. And we don't have that. We are controlled by two major parties, have been for years in North Carolina. And it's time to come out of that and break that bondage and give people a real choice in elections And we believe a party that that talks about principles above politics. I believe basically that's what people are looking for, especially grassroots North Carolinians.
On that, I'm going to have to thank Kevin Hayes and Terry Hardison of the North Carolina Constitution Party, and urge you, call 733-4111. Speak to your state senator or representative. Urge them to support House Bill 854, A Woman's Right to Know. We need it here in North Carolina.
Amen.
I'm Chuck Campbell, and God willing, I'll be back next week.